So I saw this tweet yesterday from Answers in Genesis Canada. Racists' concepts were promoted by the father of the modern day story of evolution, Charles Darwin. This, of course, is a very familiar fundamentalist, young earth creationist talking point to malign neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory by associating it with the taint of racism from Charles Darwin and particularly his book, The Descent of Man. It is a familiar talking point, and it's a bad talking point. So there are several things one could say here. I want to focus on one particular thing. I can put it very simply like this. Yeah, Charles Darwin held racist attitudes. Most everybody in the mid 19th century held racist attitudes, including Christians. The fact that Charles Darwin interpreted evolutionary theory in a racist way is really no different than Christians of the time interpreting Christianity in a racist way. And so we think about certain um, uh, expressions at this point, like the pot calling the kettle black, or the person who lives in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And those are the appropriate responses to Christians like those of Answers in Genesis, who want to taint contemporary neo-Darwinian theory with the fact that Charles Darwin, 150 years ago, held racist attitudes. Let me give you a couple examples. Of course, we're all familiar with this, I take it, but just for point of illustration, this is a famous or infamous cartoon from 1899 titled The White Man's Burden. And here it depicts a John Bull who represents Britain and Uncle Sam, who represents the United States, carrying primitive peoples up the mountain of ignorance to the peak of civilization at the top. They have to overcome barbarism, oppression, ignorance, superstition, brutality, vice, slavery, ironically, cannibalism, vice, etc., 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 which enmeshes all of these people in darkness, and they need to bring them to the light of Western culture. Now, this is obviously racist. It's obviously evincing philosophy of colonialism, but never mistake the fact that it is interwoven intimately with Christianity. So at the time, the self-understanding of the United States or Britain would have been not only that these are Western civilizations, but these are quote unquote Christian civilizations. And so to bring Western civilization to these quote unquote primitive cultures depicted by these racist stereotype caricatures, that was to bring Christianity to these nations as well. So Christianity was profoundly, inextricably interwoven with racism. Now, it does say on one of the rocks on the mountain that they are delivering these primitive peoples from slavery, but I gotta say there's something a little cheeky. You gotta have a lot of chutzpah to put slavery there as one of the things that John Bull and Uncle Sam are delivering the rest of the world from, when John Bull and Uncle Sam were only a few decades earlier themselves complicit in the sin of slavery. In fact, they were the major economic forces for the slavery that went between the Dark Triangle of Africa and the United Kingdom and the slave colonies. So let's talk a moment as well about slavery. This is an image called the Scourged Back. This gentleman has been known to us. One of the names he's been given is Peter. He was a former slave, and this picture was taken in 1863. So it was used in the middle of the Civil War, at the time of the Civil War, to illustrate the evils of slavery. Obviously, his back had been ripped to shreds, no doubt by a professing Christian slave owner who was quoting scripture at the time, because we all knew about the scriptures that one would cite in order to support slavery. So Christianity was intimately interwoven with slavery, just as Western colonialism was, just as Darwinian evolution in the 1860s was, and 1870s. To reject evolution and indict it based upon the racist attitudes through which it was interpreted in the 1860s and 70s is no different than rejecting Christianity based upon the fact, or Western society based upon the fact that they were interpreted through a racist lens as well. To conclude, this is an indefensible talking point. I'm going to use one more illustration. So I already said, don't throw stones in glass houses. Here's another one. People who use this kind of illustration are hoist by their own petard, which means they're trying to throw an incendiary rhetorical device at people who advocate for a neo-Darwinian account of evolution. And in fact, they are themselves indicted or blown up by that because that redounds on them and undermines their Christianity in the same way. If you're going to reject neo-Darwinian evolution because people in the 1860s were racist, you have to reject Christianity because Christians in the 1860s were racist.